make good money, but I still feel broke. I don't understand where it all goes. It feels like as soon as I receive it, poof, it's gone. Does this sound familiar? I work with so many mompreneurs who make good money, six figures, and yet they have no idea where it went. Why? Because they're not tracking their finances, they're not paying attention to it. They're not giving every dollar a job before it even comes in. All businesses need two things: a business plan and a financial plan. If you're not sure where your money is going, then I'm inviting you to join my school community, The Smell of Money, where we dive into exactly where your money is going and we start to look at how you think and react to the money that you're receiving and paying out so that money flows in all ways, always. Join today. The link is in the comments.
If you're tired of feeling shame about past financial decisions, worried you'll never achieve financial stability, and ready for a clear plan to take control of your money and experience true financial freedom, you're in the right place. Hey, I'm Lisa, wealth activator, independent insurance broker, and your guide to rewriting your money story. I learned the secret to creating financial freedom and stability after divorce, and I'm ready to share it with you. If you're ready for steady, stress-free income, clarity with your money, and the confidence to spend without guilt, grab your favorite essential oil, take a deep breath, and let's sniff our way through the smell of money. How to multiply the money that you already have, that you're entitled to, that you get to receive because you are worthy, you are the queen. And sometimes we don't think this. We think that I had to chase money, I need to make more money. When I make more money, then these are all myths that we believe. But today, I know a lot of you going through divorce, you're post-divorce, you're rebuilding finances, and you think at the assets that you used to have that you may not have received fully when you split up, and you're like, was that fair? So today we have a wonderful guest that I know you're all going to want to tune into and share this episode with your friends. Diana Romanov is a San Francisco family law attorney, licensed in California and Germany, and a certified family law specialist. Drawing on her own divorce experience, she founded a boutique firm to deliver personalized, efficient solutions in custody support and mediation. And this is what we want, someone in our corner. So thank you, Diana, for so much for being here. Tell us, what was this journey like? Did you have all this legal expertise behind you when you went through your divorce and used it? Or is this what helps you create this boutique experience for us?
Originally, when I got married, well, not originally, I was a student at the law school in Berlin, and I was 24 years old when I was proposed to, and including the prenup. And I remember at this moment when I received the prenup, I was so set back how boilerplate it was. So I went to the library and I found the book, something along to the lines how corporations, CEOs draft the prenups. And so it was exactly the template prenup that was in that book. So I went to my husband's father who sponsored the lawyer, said, how much did you pay to this lawyer? I remember how much he said, 2,000 euros or 4,000 euros. And I was like, this prenup is exactly from this book. Just here's the book. And so it began with me negotiating my own prenup by myself against corporation attorney, my husband attorney, because he was a trust fund baby from a German corporation who, they had 5 lawyers at the end of the day. And so I was remembering sitting in front of this huge room with all these elderly men in Germany negotiating my terms. And I did pretty well. So I didn't challenge the prenup when I was getting through divorce for many reasons. But I have to say, German prenups and European prenups, for example, French prenups, are often not enforceable in California because California law is very strict about enforceability. For example, it has to have full disclosure of all assets and debts as part of the attachment in the prenup. Germany, France doesn't have that requirement. So basically, whoever is waiving something, they don't know what they're waiving. In that prenup, let's say I was waiving all interest in that huge family law corporation, but I didn't know what that meant actually in terms of dollar percentage. So something to watch out for some people who are listening and thinking where to get a prenup. If we move to California, then it's better to have it where you're planning your divorce instead of where you're getting married or where you met each other or where you, let's say, have nationality.
Mm-hmm. The word prenup is kind of nerve-wracking. I hear that it's like, wait a minute, do you think we're going to end up in divorce? So what are the pros and cons of a prenup? And I know a lot of people, a lot of the clients that I work with don't have a prenup, and it creates this sense of, I don't want to say entitlement, but this idea that 50-50 law, and I know every state in America is different, and I'm sure California has its own set of rules, but the disease that comes with the prenup, it's almost like you're saying this marriage might not work. But then again, it's putting in terms because, I mean, it could go both ways. There's lots of women who have their own businesses who go into a marriage and are already wealthy. So how would a prenup be advantageous?
Well, it depends on which side I would be answering this question. So if I were on the side of a woman who has been already through divorce and a couple kids and would like to preserve her real estate in a scenario where she has a real estate, she earns significant amount of money and she would like to protect her estate. And let's say she decides to marry for love, not so financially privileged husband or wife. And it turns out that when they live in the house, if they both live together during the marriage, then all payments towards principal that is paid, even if if her partner, if her spouse pays for it, it's considered partially then becomes community property called Marsden and Moore claim that community, meaning both of them would have against that separate property, although it wasn't her name from the beginning. So, of course, what I would do, I would inquire about every element of assets, liability, could be also protecting from liabilities, not just from acquiring assets. So, for example, in case like that, we would say in the prenup, even though the community might pay towards principal or improvement, community will gain no community interest. The separate remains separate. It's just one example. Or if someone builds a company, a startup, and it turns out the startup is complete liability at the end, then maybe the other spouse would like to exclude any downside, not the upside, but downside, any liability. Or sometimes prenup, even for tax, if they file joint tax returns, prenup doesn't matter. IRS would go against either spouse, and then they can figure out later who will have reimbursement against whom. So prenup is a contract in case of divorce on a state level. Then we have the situation if someone sponsors green card. Then there is a form called I-864 where the sponsoring spouse signs an affidavit of support, which makes that spouse pay, in case the other spouse doesn't earn any money, pay 125% above poverty level in support. And the question becomes, well, wait a second, then what about prenup? Can I exclude that in the prenup? No, because prenup is a state-governed document, a contract, and the affidavit of support is a federal document. So it has lots of buts. What I would suggest is to limit spousal support in California, which is another topic, limit it to at least what is in affidavit of support, so it's not higher.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, because I know a lot of women will see a prenup and I'm not signing that, and they don't end up getting married, which might be a good thing, but it's not always a bad thing. I've heard of people doing postnups as well. Are you experienced with those?
Yes, and I spent significant amount of time talking about it in my last podcast, how skeptical I am about postnups, because in a prenup, we have a deadline. The deadline is date of marriage, date of wedding, you're planning, it's a ceremony, guests are waiting, there is this excitement, and this is this one nagging thing that we need to sign so that we can get to the good part. This is emotionally very sort of exciting thing to get married, but the prenup is sort of the annoyance. And then in a postnup, there is nothing in front of us other than what? Divorce? What if I don't sign the postnup I don't like? So I ended up 15 years drafting several postnuptial agreements, and not a single one was signed unless there was a divorce pending where they had to put things on the calendar and sign.
Wow.
Unless both parties have something to gain from it, I don't see there is an incentive to sign a postnup that doesn't benefit both in some ways.
Right. Yeah. And setting yourself up, I mean, when we're always talking about being prepared and planning and all, and, like I said, I mean, well, what is the stats? 50% of marriages end up in divorce.
Right.
And when you think about dividing your assets, like when you go into marriage, you're so in love. And well, maybe you're not, maybe you're kind of doubtful, but you feel pressure. But then splitting that money equally, I'm in a divorce group on Facebook, and a lot of the women, well, I was a stay-at-home mom. I gave up my career. I raised my kids. Now I'm divorced. You're talking 20, 25 years of marriage, and they literally have to start all over again. And so I know the laws are different in each state, but in some states it's 50-50 regardless. But I know in a lot of states, and I'm not sure how California is, the woman could walk away with barely anything at all. I mean, not even alimony, and she has no income. So
Not in
how would a
California.
woman prepare herself for that?
Well, in California, I would like to clarify if there is a discrepancy in income, the lower earning spouse or the non-earning spouse would receive temporary support based on current income and also long-term support. And long-term support is based on the length of marriage. In terms of length, it would be half of the length of the marriage if the marriage is under 10 years, and then potentially much longer if the marriage is over 10 years. The definition of the length of marriage is between date of marriage and date of separation. And then the amount of support is based on a formula called ex-spouse in California, which is approximately 35% of the net disposable minus 50% of the other spouse net disposable. That would be the spouse support. That sounds complicated, but if the other spouse earns zero, then it would be 35% of net disposable income, to make it simpler. In terms of your question was, how would someone prepare for a case like this? Well, first, if someone signed a prenup, definitely I would not suggest to stop working, because if the prenup is valid and enforceable, then after 25 years, it would be devastating to walk away with very little. And if there is no prenup, then I would have all my hands on all bank accounts, all tax returns. I would know the math in and out in community property to know if something happened. I would have a QuickBooks where everything is attached, credit cards, bank statements. I have a P&L of our annual, every year profit and loss to see what's going on and track all expenses, all income, make sure investments are properly done. So basically being in charge instead of sort of letting the other side run it all and then be surprised that we're in debt and then I
Yeah.
have to start all over again. So I have, for some reason, it's husbands who call me and say, well, I have been married for 25 years and she hasn't worked, and I dropped the news about spousal support and the 35%, and let's say he makes $1 million and he's like, what? I have to pay spousal support. I'm not going to work with you. I'm like, great. I don't want unreasonable client because that's California law.
Yeah, and it's funny that they don't want to provide that support. They just want out and they want to keep their money too. But we have to think about, if a mom stayed at home and gave up her career to raise the kids or what have you, you can't just expect them to live elsewhere because you no longer want the marriage to work. But protecting ourselves is really challenging as far as, making sure. It's so important. I'm glad you said that, to make sure you know where the money is, where it's going, what you have. Because I know a lot of people get blindsided and, well, he racked up debt knowing that he was going to ask for a divorce, or I was going to ask for a divorce, or what have you. I know a lot of self-employed people will hide their money very easily, transfer assets so that during a divorce they can't be touched, and then people end up with nothing. And it's devastating. I mean, I know women in their 60s who, go back to work in retail making 25 grand. They move back in with their parents because their 30-year marriage ended because their husband decided they wanted a younger woman and took all the assets with them. It's like, all I get is, maybe a percentage of the sale of the marital home, and that's it. No retirement, no nothing.
Another idea to prepare is to move to a state that benefits financial division towards equal division instead of equitable. So
Mhm.
I would shop for jurisdiction if I am in a position where I turn the blind eye to all financials, and now I learn that there is enough that my spouse wouldn't share because we're in the wrong state. I would move
You.
and file for legal separation and see if, of course, he could file and serve first in his state.
Mhm.
And I would need to not only file for divorce, but also serve him in California because
Mhm.
the court would have to have minimum contact and jurisdiction over him. So it would be a hustle, but it would be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And being prepared for that is so important, especially if you're contemplating it. I know talking to an attorney beforehand and finding out what your rights are, because a lot of people in marriages will get blindsided and the others, their partner will say, oh, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I know the law has changed. I know New York is a 50-50 state, but it used to not be, years ago. And people didn't realize it changed. And when you go and get the facts, you're more prepared to be able to deal with what's going to happen. And, I know a lot of times parents don't want to work, they want to stay home and raise their children, but it's always nice to have your hands in some kind of an income so that you can feel, prepared and not get blindsided. It was funny because before I got married, my mother-in-law told me, make sure you set up a savings account and just every time you get money, save it, save 10% of it so you have it. And don't tell your husband about it.
Yeah, I don't know about that. It feels a bit strange to sort of build a relationship on trust without having, I would plan it together so he can do the same. And I also would recommend to talk to more than one attorney, and not just an attorney, but actually ideally family law specialist, because the compliance with current law is rigorous in terms of hours of MCLEs and continued education.
Mhm.
And not just in one state, I would consider a different state as well to consult with another attorney in a different state.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, I actually had someone on the show a while back that does subpoenas, and she actually works with attorneys and helps do subpoenas because I know that's a tedious job for some attorneys to do. So what's your viewpoint on doing subpoenas to get access to all of the assets? So if they are trying to hide something, that it's revealed.
That's my favorite part, not doing formal discovery, because usually we know where the money is and which bank, and that's all we need. Once we
Mhm.
know the bank and we have social security, date of birth, address, name, we subpoena all the records through a subpoenaing service. It's so much more efficient to get it this way than drafting a document demand, sending it to the other side, and then looking whether or not they provided all the records for all the years. And then if months are missing, then we have to meet and confer, file motion to compel. Cost way too much money for what it is than instead just subpoenaing the records directly.
Mhm.
Banks provide a link. They just download everything. Nothing is missing. Images of checks are included. Usually it's never included when the other side provides it, because all they do is they download each bank statement, and it's not even labeled correctly, because when you download a bank statement and it gives you some random numbers and doesn't have check images. And then I use closed AI system with Thomson Reuters, and then run the bank statements before you even send it to an accountant and see if there are any hidden banks within these bank statements. For example, are there any other banks or bank accounts that we haven't been produced that this person might have based on the transfers to themselves?
Mhm.
And then subpoena that.
I love that. Yeah. When I worked at Social Security Administration, we used to do that for trust funds. Used to look at the transactions and wait a minute, there's an internal withdrawal. Where did this go? And find out accounts and see if they were hiding money to make themselves eligible for benefits. So yeah, I'm familiar with that process. It's amazing how much money we can legally hide. And when you start to look at it in detail, when you have a trained eye, you can really reveal a lot more so that you can get what you're entitled to, what's coming to. And, we don't like to talk about it because most people that go into a marriage, you don't say, oh, I'm going to get divorced from this person. We're just going to get married for a few years and we get divorced. I mean, I think we all go into marriage believing that, oh, this is going to last. It's, till death do us part. But then, that happens and, someone's not happy or what have you. But it's funny how the money always becomes the sword, I guess. And nobody ever happily says, oh yeah, let's just split everything equally and go our own separate ways. There's always this greed that comes into it. So how do you deal with women and men that come into you and, that are very angry and frustrated and, just get to the point where they want to fight initially, but then they just give up and they're just like, whatever, I'm just so tired of, because one of the biggest fears is I can't hire an attorney because I can't afford one. I have a dear friend who paid over $50,000 for an attorney because her ex was fighting her tooth and nail for everything, and a trust was involved, and it got to the point where she's like, I'm done spending all this money fighting.
Well, in California, at least, there is so-called need-based attorney fee request.
Mm-hmm.
So if the other side is hiding the balls, they make more money and have more access to money than the client, then the first thing we do is asking for $50,000 in attorney's fees, explaining the complexity of the case, explaining that we need to do several subpoenas, hire forensic accounting, trace post-separation money, potentially traced during the marriage money, more in Marsden claims, marital standard of living analysis for spousal support, outline every single boring topic that requires payment, and then the judge usually awards half of what we're asking.
Well, that's good to know.
So if you want 50, ask for 100.
That's a good point. That's a good point to know. But being prepared sounds like it's the key to do it. So now, do you help people in other states besides California? You had mentioned earlier for someone to talk to attorneys in different states. How is that helpful for them to do that if they're only in one
No,
state?
I was just thinking I am only allowed, I have a license in California, so I wouldn't be allowed to practice or give legal advice in different states. But when I have a multi-state case where one property is in one state, they live in both states, then of course, the first thing that comes to mind is get legal advice in every single state where you could possibly file for divorce, where he has or she has minimum contact, and it's more beneficial.
Okay. So somebody with multiple properties, a lot of snowbirds, they might have a place up north and then down south. And, if they have especially if you own a corporation or something with the holding companies, and it could be pretty, could get pretty extensive. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Prenup,
call it.
good thing. Everyone should
Yeah.
just do a prenup and call it a day, and then we won't have to worry about anything. Have you ever seen a prenup where it is advantageous for the one partner? Like you had mentioned that you had married somebody with a trust fund. So did you have to relinquish all of the rights upon divorce to the trust fund?
I actually had a case. So in trust fund situation, all income from the trust is considered separate property.
Mm-hmm.
And if all separate property income, meaning the spouse is not putting any personal effort to the growth of the trust fund, then with a prenup, without a prenup, it's still separate property. So what do we do if we create a prenup and the generous trust fund baby spouse wants to be generous? Then we create a percentage. Say every year, community or the other spouse earns 1% of all either trust fund estate or income. Depends how big the trust fund is. If it's too big, then we use the percentage based on how much income and then cap it at 20% or 35%. So if the marriage is 60%, the other spouse doesn't get 60% of the entire estate.
Hey, that works. Somehow we have to be able to protect ourselves. So
Yeah.
definitely the research and gathering the facts, writing them down, understanding them fully, that is worth it, the gold. Because if we don't know that, we go in things blindly and we end up with nothing. And some people might be okay with that, but you do have to start from scratch and, be okay with starting from scratch and having nothing. So yeah, well, thank you for sharing all of that.
And if I were to represent the other spouse who is working, and then let's say the other spouse stays home and takes care of the children, and the spouse who is working, making a lot of money and doesn't want to pay spousal support, then don't stay married for 25 years with someone you don't want to pay spousal support later to. So it's
Have a choice. You
yeah,
have a
divorce right away.
I know, well, a lot of women are afraid to get divorced because of finances, and all they see is the numbers like, well, I can't afford to get, I have to stay in this marriage. And no, there's always a way to be able to come out, because you can go to work, you can find a job. It might not be easy. I was talking to someone in my community on school, The Smell of Money, and she was like, well, I got divorced 2 years ago, ended up with nothing, and I haven't been able to find a job. And I'm barely making ends meet. And, I mean, she's doing something for income. It's just not what she wants to be doing. It's not bringing in the money that she desires. And I'm like, well, what is the amount of money that you want to bring in? And how diligently are you looking for a job? So, we think about working online, being an entrepreneur remotely versus working for somebody corporate. I mean, a lot of people don't want to exchange that commute time for their personal time. So it's always a choice. We always have a choice of how we want to bring money in. And yeah, our old life of, oh, I used to have this, but now I don't. We can flip that just by being comfortable with what we do have. It reminds me of a movie. I can't remember the name of it, but it just flashed. The woman was married to a very, very wealthy man, and they had a son, and they met the son's girlfriend or fiance, and she's a free spirit and taught this woman like how to be a free spirit. So she ended up leaving her husband, and she had to leave all of the money behind. So she left all of this wealth because she wanted this freedom that her daughter-in-law had. And she ended up getting a job back as she was a teacher in a school. So the movie was really cool, but she ended up going into this part of town where she could afford to live, which was slum compared to where she came from. And she's like, I don't care. This is my freedom. And, in the movie, she's scrubbing the apartment and making it her own and socializing with, the lower class citizens and loving it, thinking this is my freedom. All the money in the world could never replace my freedom. And by her having that different attitude, it allowed her to separate herself from the money, from being rich and wearing fancy clothes and, having servants and things of that nature. So we get to choose.
Golden handcuffs.
Exactly. Yes, I've heard that term a couple of times. I like that analogy, golden handcuffs. So, we have the key. Do we want to wear them or not? So
Yeah.
thank you. So
That
if
movie
someone
is actually my story.
So if somebody's in California or even Germany, I know we have some global listeners, and they have questions about divorce and settlements, prenups, things of that nature, how can they connect with you?
Well, I made it easy. If you type in Google "divorce like a boss," you will find me one way or another. I have a book on Amazon. I have a website and a YouTube channel with
Perfect.
over 500 videos about divorce topics and prenups.
Beautiful. I love that. Divorce like a boss. Everyone listening, check the show notes for the link. Google it, like Deanna said, and get informed, because you get to decide how much money you get, whether it comes from the ex or if it comes from you. Because remember, doesn't matter how much money you have, it's what you do with it. Hey, mompreneurs, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please follow the show and share it with a friend who's rebuilding her finances after divorce. No spreadsheets, no restrictive budgets, only confidence to build financial freedom. Also, please drop a quick 5-star review so more moms starting over can find this. It lights me up to know this podcast is helping you. Inhale confidence, exhale scarcity. I'll meet you back on Tuesday for another episode. It doesn't matter how much money you have, it's what you do with it.